11. The weight of history, how organizational memory shapes interpretation. Every global organization carries a history, not the one archived in annual reports or employee handbooks, but the history that lives inside people. This history is emotional, not chronological. It is built from past crises, past leaders, past missteps, past victories, past tensions, and past silences. It forms a collective memory that quietly influences how teams interpret messages long after the original events have faded from conversation. Organizational memory is powerful because it is rarely discussed openly. It sits underneath everyday behavior, shaping how people respond to tone, urgency, escalation, and hierarchy. It is a kind of inherited emotional logic, passed from one team to another, one leader to the next. And because it is emotional, not procedural, it persists even when structures, strategies, and personnel change. One global executive once told me, "I didn't realize I was speaking to a company that remembered things I had never lived through." She had joined during a period of stability, eager to bring calm, clarity, and direction. But no matter how carefully she communicated, certain teams reacted with caution and hesitancy. Initially, she assumed this was a cultural pattern. Only later did she learn that a previous leadership team, years before her arrival, had punished early escalation and reacted harshly to mistakes. That imprint had lingered. Even though those leaders had moved on and the culture had improved, the emotional residue remained. This is organizational memory at work, the shadow of past experiences shaping present interpretation. A similar dynamic appeared in a multinational retail company where teams in two regions responded very differently to strategic updates. One region engaged readily, asked questions, and offered suggestions. Another region remained cautious, rarely volunteering input. Leadership interpreted this as a cultural difference until they traced the behavior back to a period 5 years earlier when that region experienced a difficult restructuring. The restructuring had left emotional scars, creating an internal narrative that leadership discussions were risky. The current leadership team had inherited a silence that did not belong to them. The present was being interpreted through the emotional lens of the past. Organizational memory is not always negative. Sometimes teams carry memories of strong collaboration, supportive leadership, and shared victories. These memories create emotional trust that carries people through difficult periods. But even positive memories can complicate communication. A region that once experienced empowering leadership may interpret new leaders' messages as overly controlling. A team that once had a hands-off leader may interpret later structure as mistrust. Memory shapes context. And context shapes meaning. One international bank learned this during a transition to more agile, experimental processes. In regions with a history of innovation, teams embraced the change immediately. In regions with a history of regulatory pressure and strict compliance culture, teams hesitated. They were not resistant to change, they were interpreting the new freedom through the lens of past risk environments. Their emotional memory told them that improvisation was dangerous, even though leadership was asking them to be more flexible. Leaders often underestimate how long emotional memories last. They assume that once they say the right thing, the organization will reset. But emotional memory is not resettable through instruction. It must be reconditioned through repeated, consistent emotional signals. Trust is not built through declarations of trustworthiness, it is built through experiencing trust. Safety is not created through statements of safety, it is created when people test boundaries and find no negative consequence. In one global services organization, a new leader attempted to create openness by repeatedly encouraging teams to challenge him. But the organization had lived through years of leadership where challenge was discouraged. Team members remained silent not because they disagreed, but because their internal emotional memory told them challenge was unsafe. The leader grew frustrated. "I'm inviting the behavior," he said, "but they won't step forward." The breakthrough came only when he realized that invitation was not enough. He had to demonstrate repeatedly and calmly that disagreement did not carry consequences. Only then did the organization's emotional memory begin to update. Organizational memory also affects how people respond to crisis. Two teams may face the same disruption, but their internal histories shape how they experience it. A team with a history of successful crisis navigation may feel energized and mobilized. A team whose past crises were mishandled may feel anxious or paralyzed. Leaders may believe they are managing the present, but in reality, they are managing the present plus the emotional echoes of the past. This becomes especially clear in global organizations with long histories. A company that once underwent a reputational crisis may react disproportionately to minor customer complaints decades later. A region that experienced political instability may interpret leadership silence differently from a region with a quieter past. A team that once suffered through a culture of control may misread neutral instructions as renewed pressure. Emotional memory does not distinguish between small and large signals. It responds automatically to patterns it recognizes. One of the most intriguing manifestations of organizational memory is how it shapes hierarchy. In organizations with a history of authoritative leaders, teams often remain cautious even after the culture shifts. They hesitate to escalate, fearing that old consequences may return. In organizations with a history of collaborative leadership, teams may challenge too quickly, assuming the emotional safety of the past is still present. Leadership changes faster than emotional memory. And unless leaders acknowledge this, they may misinterpret team behavior entirely. Understanding organizational memory requires leaders to ask different questions. Instead of asking, "Why are they behaving this way?" they ask, "What history is shaping this behavior?" Instead of asking, "Why is this region so cautious?" they ask, "What happened here that caution still feels safe?" Instead of asking, "Why don't they escalate?" they ask, "What emotional rule was written before I arrived?" Only when leaders see behavior through the lens of history can they begin to shift it. In global organizations, where teams have lived through multiple leadership styles, multiple restructurings, multiple cultural changes, and multiple crises, the emotional memory is layered and complex. It can take years for teams to forget previous emotional climates, even when every procedural system has been redesigned. People interpret the present through the emotional residue of the past. The most effective leaders treat organizational memory as a living force, something that must be understood, acknowledged, and intentionally reshaped. They do not dismiss it as outdated or irrelevant. They recognize that memory does not fade with time, it fades with new emotional experiences. And those experiences must be created deliberately. The next chapter explores how emotional history interacts with organizational trust, the invisible contract that determines whether teams feel safe enough to align, question, challenge, escalate, and collaborate without the distortions that drift creates.